Hello, welcome to PAX Fabulous. I'm Michael. You may recognize me from that time I got my head chopped off and turned into a giant, colossal, eldritch goop monster in an attempt to reclaim it. Don't worry, I got better. Princess Mononoke is a 1997 animated film produced by a studio whose name cannot be properly pronounced without providing 2 minutes of context. It's a story of environmentalism, war, hatred, and forgiveness. It's a masterclass in gorgeous animation and illustration. It's a work of art. Just look at this. So pretty. Princess Mononoke was the first Studio Ghibli film I ever watched, a decision to which a friend of mine said, "What? What's wrong with you? Why not Ponyo or My Neighbor Totoro? Would these have been more traditional entry points? Do they contain less disturbing concepts and energy? Perhaps. Who's to say? Not me, I still haven't watched them. You know what I have watched repeatedly? Princess Mononoke. Because here's the thing. I think this movie loves peace as much as I do. The environmental themes are undeniable, but there's more to it than that. Princess Mononoke is a film that believes in resolving conflict peacefully, and it wants you to believe in that too. And Ashitaka may be the best example of a peace warrior that I've ever seen. Part 1, Fighting for Peace. I'm confused. What do you mean by a peace warrior? That doesn't make any sense. Peace and war are opposites. It's paradoxical. It's an oxymoron. How can you be a peace warrior? Thanks, audience surrogate Michael. Those are good questions. We'd better start out by defining some terms, like what a peace warrior is, and what even peace means. For that matter, let's just start with what conflict means. Conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. That's how the authors of Interpersonal Conflict, 11th edition, define it. And it works pretty well. There's an argument to be made that conflict doesn't have to be expressed in order to exist. For instance, Johan Galtung, often considered the founder of peace studies, talks about latent conflict, which contains the attitudes and rationale for a conflict but lacks the behavior. But overall, this definition includes the important things. So what's peace then? Is it just the lack of conflict? Well, I hope not, because if there's one thing that practically everyone that studies peace and conflict agrees on, it's that conflict is inevitable. And if conflict is inevitable and peace is the absence of conflict, then that means that lasting peace is impossible. So it can't be that, I hope. Galtung gives us two definitions for peace. The first is a noun, the absence/reduction of violence of all kinds. That kind of takes the place of what we were just discussing. If peace can't be the lack of conflict, maybe it's the lack of violence. We'll come back to that. This is generally referred to as negative peace. It's a state of being, and it has to do with how conflict is managed. And that's where Galtung's second definition comes in handy, nonviolent and creative conflict transformation. Peace is a way of dealing with conflict productively and constructively instead of destructively. For the sake of convenience, let's define contention as the opposite of peace. It's a way of dealing with conflict destructively. It's unjust or merciless or joyless. It's focused on defeating and even destroying your enemy, not on accomplishing your own goals. Contention might even drive you to give up your goals in order to win. For instance, in Princess Mononoke, the boar god Akodo brings his tribe from afar to fight against the humans who are cutting down the forest and mining for iron. The boars don't stand much of a chance, but battle is the only way they can see to protect their forest. And they're willing to throw away their lives and lose the battle if it means getting to fight.
You'd risk everything on one last battle. That's just what the humans want.
I do not ask for the help of the wolf tribe. Even if every one of us dies, it will be a battle the humans will never forget.
That's what contention looks like. It isn't focused on finding or creating a solution. It's about engaging in conflict destructively. Peace, on the other hand, is about building a new future. But before we move on, let's finish defining things. First, what's violence? Well, Galtung suggests that it means hurting or harming. And frankly, that feels like a pretty apt definition. It leaves open the possibility of not just physical violence, but also emotional or social or even spiritual violence. Harm can be inflicted in a number of ways, and a comprehensive understanding of violence needs to take that into account. And as we saw before, peace can mean the lack of violence, which means that anytime we engage in conflict by trying to hurt somebody, even by just calling them a name, we aren't practicing peace, but rather contention. Violence is contentious. Violence of any kind can never be peaceful. And that returns us to the paradox of a peace warrior. What do I mean by that? If you can't be violent, how can you be a warrior? Well, there's an alternative to violence. It's called, and this is true, non-violence. And the definition here is pretty simple. If violence is an act that inflicts harm, then non-violence is action that doesn't inflict harm. That can include the use of force as long as the force is not meant to inflict harm. Consider this moment in Princess Mononoke. San, the human girl raised by wolves, and Lady Eboshi, the leader of Irontown, are trying to fight to the death. They both want nothing more than to kill each other in this moment. And given the chance, they would. So what does Ashitaka, our hero and role model, do in this situation? He stuns both of them, preventing them from killing each other without causing lasting harm to either one. The next time we see Eboshi, she's fine. And when San wakes up, she's instantly okay. It was an act of force, but not an act of violence. In fact, it was meant to prevent violence. And that's what it means to be a peace warrior. Peace isn't a noun, it's an adverb. It's a way of engaging in conflict. And that means that being pro-peace, that being a pacifist, doesn't mean staying out of conflict or war. It means going into it. It doesn't mean cowardice either. As we'll see later, being a peace warrior requires supernumerary courage. I just learned that word, I've been looking for a way to use it. A peace warrior is someone who's willing to fight with peace for peace. Their goal is, as Galtung puts it, the absence and reduction of violence by others, and their approach is nonviolence. A peace warrior enters war, but they don't let war enter their heart. They confront contention, but they don't give in to it. They don't flee from conflict, they embrace it and elevate it. A peace warrior is a warrior with a heart at peace. Part 2, Eyes Unclouded by Hate. In 1923, Jewish philosopher Martin Buber published Ich und Du, a German title which I have most certainly mispronounced. I apologize. Later translated in English as I and Thou, this was a landmark work of Jewish philosophy that has been influential ever since. In it, Buber describes two attitudes a person can have. The first is the I-it attitude, which views the other as an it or object. The alternative is the I-thou attitude, which views the other as a thou or a person. The I-thou attitude sees the other as an equal, as someone with just as much legitimacy and validity as you have. The I-it attitude sees the other as an object, as inhuman, as different. Objectification and differentiation are closely linked. It's easy to pay so much attention to your differences that you don't notice your similarities. In the words of Ursula K. Le Guin, if you deny any affinity with another person or kind of person, if you declare it to be wholly different from yourself, as men have done to women and class has done to class, and nation has done to nation, you may hate it or deify it, but in either case you have denied its spiritual equality and its human reality. You have made it into a thing to which the only possible relationship is a power relationship, and thus you have fatally impoverished your own reality. You have, in fact, alienated yourself. That's what an I-it attitude means. It means seeing people as objects. On the other hand is an I-thou attitude. My mom told me a story once about going to the grocery store with us when we were little kids. As she was walking through the parking lot, she saw a big muscly guy covered in all these tattoos getting off his motorcycle. She instinctively pulled us closer to her. And then she watched as that guy stopped and looked both ways before crossing the street. In that moment, she realized that that guy had a mom, or at least some loving person in his life, who had taught him to look both ways before crossing the street. And that even now, as a big, scary dude who rode motorcycles, he still did what he'd been taught to do as a kid. In that moment, she saw his humanity. She saw him as a person, not as a threat, but as a fellow child of God. That's what it means to see people as people. That's what it means to have an I-thou attitude. So what does this have to do with peace and conflict and Princess Mononoke and being a peace warrior? Well, Buber's philosophy of these two attitudes were eventually adopted and adapted in a best-selling book on conflict called, I have it here, The Anatomy of Peace. The authors of this book offer alternative names for Buber's attitudes, which they call ways of being. Having an I-it attitude, or viewing the other as an object, is called the heart at war. Having a heart at war damages our relationships and perpetuates destructive conflict. When our hearts are at war, we can't see situations clearly, we can't consider others' positions seriously enough to solve difficult problems, and we end up provoking hurtful behavior in others. Gee, I wonder where we might have seen that way of being before. San? It's pretty clear she doesn't see the humans as, well, human, and she's definitely got a destructive attitude.
I'm not afraid to die. I'd do anything to get you humans out of my forest.
Except, that's not really true, is it, San? You won't talk to them, you won't acknowledge your shared humanity, you won't try to reason with them. After all, you can't reason with an object. And therein lies the destructiveness of a heart at war. You become incapable of believing that the other side can reason, can cooperate, can change. And so, you don't even try. Let's be honest, Eboshi isn't much better. She too refuses to acknowledge her shared humanity with San, and she won't until she finishes destroying the forest.
When the forest has been cleared and the wolves wiped out, this desolate place will be the richest land in the world.
And Princess Mononoke will become human.
To Eboshi, San is not human. Her soul has been stolen by the wolves, and the only way to deal with her is to fight her. And when Ashitaka gets in the way of that, Eboshi starts viewing him as an object too, as an obstacle.
I'm getting a little bored of this curse of yours, Ashitaka. Let me just cut the damn thing off!
Except that Eboshi doesn't treat everyone this way. See, the nice thing about using this way of being framework is that it refers specifically to your way of being towards someone, which means you can have a heart of war against one person, but not against another. And that brings us to the other way of being, having an I-thou attitude, or viewing the other as a person, having a heart at peace. The difference is drastic. Having a heart of peace positions you to begin to exert influence towards peace instead of provocation towards war. And while it won't solve your complex outer problems, those problems can't begin to be solved without it. Lady Eboshi very clearly sees and treats the people of Irontown as people. She's the one who has liberated the women from brothels and given them jobs at the bellows. And listen to how the leper defends her.
She's the only one who saw us as human beings. We are lepers the world hates and fears us, but she took us in and washed our rotting flesh and bandaged us.
Eboshi was the only one who saw the lepers as people. She was the only one with a heart at peace towards them. Even though she has a heart at war against San and the wolves, she's still capable of having a heart at peace towards the people of Irontown. Now, before we start analyzing Ashitaka's heart at peace, I want to take a detour based on the language that Princess Mononoke uses to mean a heart at peace.
It's your fate to go there and see what you can see with eyes unclouded by hate.
That's the charge placed on Ashitaka at the beginning of his journey. Eyes unclouded by hate. And the reason why he must stay free of hate is pretty simple. Part 3, hatred is the main villain of this movie. No, really, I mean, who else could it be? It's not San, she's the love interest. And it's not really Eboshi, she's a hero, at least everyone in Irontown. It can't be Lord Asano, the guy trying to conquer Irontown. He's never actually in the movie. So maybe it's Jigo, the guy with the permission and the plan to kill the forest spirit for profit. He definitely seems to fit the bill, but we see plenty of examples of him caring for other people, which isn't very villainous of him. The thing is, all of these people, except for Asano, who again is not in the movie, all of them try to kill, or at least maim Ashitaka at some point. But they also all help and take care of him at some point. So what's the difference? Hatred is the difference. When San tries to kill Ashitaka, it's because he's a human, and 90% of her personality is hating humans, a hobby that I cannot recommend putting on your online dating profile. When Eboshi threatens to chop off Ashitaka's arm, it's because he's standing between her and killing San, whom she hates. Hate makes them act like villains, because it's the true villain.
Editing Michael here. My battery kept dying in my camera while I was recording this video, and as a result, there's a big chunk here that I thought got recorded that didn't. So I'm doing it now. And that's clear from the way the movie treats hatred. Before the movie even starts, Nago, another boar god, becomes a demon after he lets hatred consume him.
He had some kind of a poison inside him, driving him mad. A poisonous hatred that consumed his heart and flesh and turned him into a demon monster.
Hatred is what turned Nago into a monster. Admittedly, she later says that the iron bullet found in the boar's body is what turned him into a monster, but I don't think that's entirely true. Later, Moro, the wolf god who raised San, admits that she too carries a poisoned human bullet in her chest, but she doesn't turn into a demon. It isn't the bullet itself that is poisonous, it's what it stands for and causes.
Nago was afraid to die. Nago fled, and the darkness took him.
It wasn't the bullet that turned Nago into a demon. It was his reaction to it. He was full of fear, and in the words of Grand Jedi Master Yoda,
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate.
and hatred leads to the suffering both experienced and inflicted by Nago. His last words confirm that regardless of whatever fear had initially driven him away from Irontown, by the time he was a demon, he had become driven purely by hatred.
Disgusting little creatures. Soon all of you will feel my hate and suffer as I have suffered.
Oh, good. Thank you for those haunting last words and the deeply disconcerting body horror. I was afraid I might sleep well tonight. The point is, again, hatred is what turns Nago into a demon. It robs him of his intelligence and divinity and turns him into a rampaging beast that leaves only devastation and desolation in his wake. And we see the same thing almost happen to Akoto after he too lets his hatred of humanity fully destroy and even madden him. And here's the key. San starts to turn into a demon with him. Unpoisoned by a bullet within her, she starts to get absorbed into the demon's biomass simply by contact. After all, it couldn't possibly because, San has hatred within her. Could it?
I hate him. I hate all humans.
Never! I hate all of you humans!
What? That's crazy. Color me surprised. Except that it shouldn't be too surprising. Ashitaka already told us that San had a demon within her.
There's a demon inside of you. It's inside both of you.
Yeah, that bit where I said that San's personality was 90% hating humans wasn't entirely a bit. She shares that same hatred that Akoto holds in his heart, and when it starts turning him into a demon, it starts doing the same to her. Hatred is contagious. It's not just a poison, it's a disease. And it infects everyone. It even infects Ashitaka. While fighting Nago to try and protect his village, he gets touched by the demon, and it curses him with a curse that will spread until it completely destroys him. This curse is clearly connected to hatred. Firstly, it's inflicted by a demon, which in this movie is the personification of hatred. Secondly, whenever Ashitaka starts feeling angry, demon-like worms writhe around his arm. And thirdly,
Fear and anger only make it grow faster.
remember Yoda's words. Fear and anger feed the curse, just like they feed hatred. Ashitaka might not be a particularly hate-filled character like San or Akoto, but he too is its victim. We all are. I mean, hatred is a normal human experience. It's a natural response to injustice. It's a logical outgrowth of anger. But it's also a purely destructive force. And if we let it control us rather than us controlling it, it'll lead us to destroy anything that we can, including ourselves. Ashitaka's curse is a deadly one, for which there appears to be no cure aside from divine mercy. In the end, hatred will destroy him, regardless of whether or not he gives into it. Both Nago and Akoto lose themselves to hatred and mindless destruction when they become demons. Hatred is inevitably a process of self-destruction. It leads directly to contention, which means it leads directly away from peace. And so, if we want to prevent contention and embrace peace, we need to eschew hatred and instead exercise its opposite, love.
Part 4, Radical Assertive Love. In a book called Proclaim Peace, Professors J. David Pulsipher and Patrick Q. Mason compare violence to a fire. There are things that fire needs in order to keep burning. Oxygen, fuel, heat, water, or sand, or whatever the heck is in a fire extinguisher, puts out fire by depriving it of one or more of these elements. It displaces the oxygen, it renders the fuel inflammable, it cools the heat. Pulsipher and Mason suggest that violence has its own components: distance, rationale, and a predictable response. These closely align with Galtung's triangle for the components of conflict: attitudes and assumptions, contradictions, and behavior. We're going to adopt and blend these approaches by treating them as components of contention. But perhaps the most notable suggestion from Proclaim Peace is that the fire of contention has its own water: love. Not romantic love, but charity, or the Greek agape. Love for humanity. Not just loving your neighbor, but loving your enemy. What a radical idea. I'm sure only good things have happened to people who preach it. And to be clear, when I say love, I mean genuine affection for and a sincere desire for the well-being of another human, without condition or ulterior motive. Now, that doesn't preclude self-love. As we'll see, being passive perpetuates conflict. No, we're talking about assertive love. That means taking actions that are rooted in a desire for mutual benefit and blessing. It isn't weak, it's kind. You're not trying to kill them with kindness, you're killing contention with love. Let's break this down bit by bit. First up, let's talk about the predictable response, or the behavior in a conflict. There are a few default responses to violence and contention. One is to flee or avoid it. I'll be honest, this is my default. But that encourages violence by making the aggressor think that violence works. They'll do it again because they'll expect the same response. They'll expect the next victim to flee as well. Another response is to give in to or accommodate the aggressor, but that causes the same problem. And then, of course, you can try and fight back. This is probably the most predictable response to violence, to meet it with more violence. I talk about this more in my Doctor Who video, but this mindset creates a cycle of violence. Galtung argues that violence of any kind breeds violence of any kind. Consider the warning that Eboshi gives when San breaks into Irontown to kill her.
If you seek revenge for all the animals we've killed, well, there are 2 women down here whom I'd like you to meet. They want revenge as well, for husbands killed by your wolves.
Revenge is a way of meeting violence with violence. It comes out of a desire for justice, which is honorable, but justice can't come from contention. And as we've discussed, violence is always contentious. All this does is encourage further retributive violence. It just feeds the cycle of violence. Or at least, it does until someone breaks the cycle with love. Love is an unpredictable response. It's not running away, and it's not surrendering, and it's not fighting back. It's opening up. People straight up don't know what to do when this happens. It stops the cycle. Consider what happens when Ashitaka steps into the fight between San and Eboshi. He knocks them both out, notably Eboshi first, so that San sees it, and then he carries San away from Irontown, removing her from the site of battle. When he collapsed from bloodshed, she leaps to cut his throat, but she doesn't. She can't.
Why did you stop me from killing her? Tell me while you're still alive.
I didn't want them to kill you. That's why.
I should kill you for saving her!
You're beautiful.
W Riz, am I right? No, really, am I right? I don't know if I'm using W correctly. San is used to the people of Irontown meeting her violence with more violence. It's all she knows to expect from humans. When Ashitaka does the opposite, when he shows her love, it breaks that cycle, and she can't bring herself to kill him. Which leads us right into the next component of contention, the rationale or contradiction. This is the reason, or at least the perceived reason, for engaging in conflict or violence. Pulsipher and Mason identified 2 categories here, threats and grievances. For San and the wolves and boars, the humans pose a threat to the forest. That's their rationale for engaging in conflict. For those women in Irontown, the deaths of their husband are grievances. They are past wrongs that feel like they still need to be corrected, and that's their rationale for fighting. But love deals with rationale too, because it erases it. There's quite literally nothing threatening about love, at least real love, the kind we're talking about. Love indicates a desire to care, not to harm. It's basically the opposite of a threat. And it doesn't rekindle old grievances like violence or contention does, so it doesn't bring back past rationales. One of the reasons San can't bring herself to kill Ashitaka is because he's removed her rationale. He didn't pose a threat to her, he saved her. He didn't act in a way that recalled past wrongs, he acted in a way she'd never seen before. San expected Ashitaka to be hateful like the other humans, but instead he was loving. Her rationale for killing evaporates, and she ends up taking him to the Forest Spirit's Island to be healed. The final component of contention is distance, which feeds into violence by separating the aggressor from the victim. This can be physical distance, it's easier to bomb someone on the other side of the world after all, but it can also be emotional distance, what Galtung refers to as the attitudes and assumptions in a conflict. Distance can be dehumanization. It can be, say it with me, a heart at war. But love shrinks that distance by rehumanizing the other. It creates within us a heart at peace. It can't reduce physical distance, but it can encourage us to reduce that distance ourselves, either by traveling to see the other person or by using technology that spans long distances. For instance, after Ashitaka is healed by the forest spirit, San brings him back to her home to finish recovering. His love has encouraged her to close the distance and bring a human into her home. So that's how love defeats contention and brings peace. It extinguishes the fires of violence and contention, and it invites new opportunities. It breaks the cycle of violence, and it reinforces and is rooted in a heart at peace. You probably noticed a couple of the dichotomies I'm creating here. Peace and contention, nonviolence and violence, love and hatred. They're all connected. Being peaceful means practicing nonviolence, and nonviolence comes from loving the other, and love is generated by a heart of peace. They feed into and strengthen one another. They allow you to become a peace warrior. And Ashitaka is a great example of that. Throughout the film, he demonstrates and maintains a heart at peace. When he hears Eboshi take blame for Nago's transformation into a demon, he gets angry, a natural reaction, and his cursed arm tries to draw his sword, but he stops it. He restrains himself because he knows that hatred isn't the answer, that he can only ask himself to break the cycle of violence. And he sees Eboshi as human, just as she saw the lepers as human. He defends San's life, even though he knew from the first moment that he saw her that she'd do anything to get rid of humans, including him. He sees her as human, even though she refuses to see herself that way. He even sees Jigo as a human, regardless of how greedy and selfish a human he is. And the thing is, the movie wants you to keep a heart of peace towards its characters too. We're supposed to find San sympathetic, despite the fact that she would hate us because we're human. We're supposed to find Eboshi sympathetic because she looks out for the lepers and prostitutes and gives them a new life. The only reason she goes along with the plan to kill the forest spirit is because she genuinely believes it will benefit and protect her people.
When the forest has been cleared and the wolves wiped out, this desolate place will be the richest land in the world. The legends say the blood of the great forest spirit can heal anything. Perhaps it could cure my poor lepers.
Believe it or not, I think we're even supposed to find Jigo sympathetic. He sends Ashitaka to the forest spirit, and while you could argue that he does that for vague, selfish reasons that further his own plan, Ashitaka only ever ends up being an obstacle to Jigo's plan. So I think it's probably more likely that Jigo was sincerely trying to help him out. And after seeing Akoto get turned into a demon, Jigo specifically tells his men to get the wounded out of here. He does care for other people, even if his first priority is himself. And that should make it hard for us to write him off completely. Princess Mononoke, the movie itself, wants to see its characters as humans. It wants us to have a heart of peace. By Ashitaka's example, it wants to show us the way of the warrior. Part 5, the way of the warrior. You know, I don't know how many minutes into the video we are, but I'm 15 pages into this script, which feels like the perfect time to acknowledge my limitations as a critic of this movie. I don't speak Japanese. I don't even really know much about Japanese culture. Everything that I know has been obtained from cultural osmosis. And so there are absolutely insights to this movie that I'm missing. If you know them, please leave them in the comments. Cover my blind spot for me. This analysis is missing some critical cultural context, and I'm aware of that. The reason I bring all this up is because I want to go even further out of my depth and talk about Ueshiba Morihei, the founder of Aikido. And I know I probably mispronounced both his name and that word. But in my defense, I also mispronounced German earlier. Ueshiba's creation of Aikido was guided by 3 visions. In the first, he came to understand the nature of creation. The way of a warrior is to manifest divine love, a spirit that embraces and nurtures all things. The role of a warrior is to manifest a universal love? Interesting. Familiar, even. His third vision, received in 1942 during World War II, expanded on this revelation. The way of the warrior has been misunderstood as a means to kill and destroy others. Those who seek competition are making a grave mistake. To smash, injure, or destroy is the worst sin a human being can commit. The real way of a warrior is to prevent slaughter. It is the art of peace, the power of love. In the midst of the most devastating war that the world had ever seen, Ueshiba boldly declared that the true role of a warrior was not to kill, but to prevent killing. The only thing I can imagine being more subversive and radical than that is the idea of loving your enemies. If your heart is large enough to envelop your adversaries, you can see right through them and avoid their attacks. And once you envelop them, you will be able to guide them along a path indicated to you by heaven and earth. This is the way of a warrior. Or at least it's the way of a peace warrior. It's what Ashitaka does. He acts to prevent slaughter and stop violence as much as he can. And the fundamental basis of that approach, the foundation of being a warrior, the core of the art of peace, is the power of love. Michael, what does any of that look like? Thank you again, audience surrogate Michael. You're always so helpful. And you're right, having a heart of peace is an internal way of being, and so it's hard to observe. But there are also outward actions that are part of being a peace warrior. And we can turn those into a sort of checklist of things that peace warriors do. But before we do, a warning. Any action can be taken with either a heart at war or a heart at peace. Following this checklist won't necessarily create within you a heart at peace. It might help, but unless you're ready to love your enemies, these techniques won't actually work to create peace. We can sense others' way of being towards us, and if you're doing peaceful things to someone with a heart at war, they'll sense it and react negatively. Number 1, offer the benefit of the doubt. The movie starts off with Nago's attack on the Emishi village, and Ashitaka jumps straight into action to try and stop it. He ends up killing the demon to stop it, one of his few acts of violence, which we'll address shortly. But before he does, he tries to deal with the assault diplomatically.
Calm your fury! Almighty Lord, whatever you may be, God or demon, please leave us in peace!
He starts by talking, not fighting. He assumes that the threat can be reasoned with. Notice too that even though Ji, the watchman, already told Ashitaka that the creature was a demon, Ashitaka doesn't stick with that assumption. Instead, he offers his enemy respect, calling it god or demon, making clear that the distinction wouldn't change his reaction to the threat. Offering someone the benefit of the doubt means that when you have insufficient information to determine whether someone is acting in good or faith or bad faith, you assume the best of them. It means doubting any suspicions you have and treating them as though they are capable of and likely to do the right thing. It's a sign of faith, and it requires courage and hope. Ashitaka does this a lot. When he sees Kuroku and the other man from Irontown who survived the wolves' attack, he immediately rescues and starts caring for them, with no concern about who they are or what they might do to him. And then he sees San and the wolves for the first time, and it isn't exactly an inviting scene. So pretty. But what does Ashitaka do?
My name is Ashitaka. I've traveled far from lands to the east. Are you ancient gods, and have I come at last to the realm of the spirit of the forest?
First thing he does is introduce himself and ask who they are. No concern about why there's a bullet hole or why there's blood on San's face. No fear that they might attack him. He gives them the benefit of the doubt and asks for their help. Absolute icon. The lesson is clear. A peace warrior assumes the best intentions of other people and offers them the benefit of the doubt. Number 2, limit force and remain nonviolent. Well, it's happened, just as the skeptics said it might. You gave someone the benefit of doubt and they proved you wrong. Time to use force, right? Maybe, but be careful. A peace warrior with a heart at peace doesn't want to use force. And if you find yourself looking for the opportunity to fight, you may need to recalibrate the love you have for your enemy. Remember what your goal is, to prevent violence. Ueshiba wrote that in the art of peace we never attack. An attack is proof that one is out of control. Control is key. Should the need for force arise, exercise restraint and make sure that you cause no harm. Elsewhere, Ueshiba says that to injure an opponent is to injure yourself. To control aggression without inflicting injury is the art of peace. Only use as much force as is necessary, and when calculating that, it's better to come up short than to spill over into violence. Ashitaka offers us a pretty good role model. We've already seen how he ends the duel between San and Eboshi, but he also exercises restraint leading up to that moment. Gonza, the captain of the guard in Irontown, tries to stop Ashitaka, and Ashitaka, in response, twists his sword out of shape. This is definitely an exercise of force, but it's not really an attack, and it's certainly not violence. It doesn't have to be. Soon after, when Ashitaka is trying to escape Irontown with San, the guards refuse to let him out through the door.
Sir, I can't let you pass. The gate's been ordered shut. It can't be opened.
Turn back, please. We're grateful to you for bringing those men back to us. We don't want to hurt you. Please.
There's clearly a danger of violence here. The guards are expecting it. After all, it's a predictable response. They don't want to hurt him, but they're ready to if they feel the need arises. So what does Ashitaka do?
I walked in through this gate this morning. Now I'm going to leave the same way.
He exercises force, but not against the guards. He chooses another path, one that satisfies both his desire to leave and the guards' desire to obey their orders. Later on, when Eboshi and Jigo are attempting to kill the forest spirit, Ashitaka intervenes. One would think that if there was a time to justify violence and unrestrained force, This would be it. But instead, when Ashitaka throws his sword, he doesn't aim to kill or wound. The way of the warrior is to prevent violence, and sometimes you fail. Perhaps if Ashitaka had, killed Eboshi here, the forest spirit would have survived. Or perhaps another of Jigo's men would have finished the job, and all of Irontown would turn against Ashitaka, and he would give into hatred and turn into a demon, and his curse would lead him to kill everybody before finally destroying him. Violence breeds violence. It is better to fail to prevent violence than it is to encourage and invite more of it. That's what Ashitaka understands. But Michael, what about when he kills Nago, or he kills the samurai, or he threatens to kill Jigo? Thank you again, audience surrogate Michael. I should have said that's what Ashitaka understands most of the time. That's right. It's time we confront all of our heroes' failures. First, let's talk about Nago's death. As we've seen, Ashitaka does try diplomacy first, and he only attacks Nago when he sees that his sister, Kaya, is ready to fight it herself. In his defense, he has not yet been given the charge to see with eyes unclouded by hate. He's not yet adopted the way of the peace warrior. And if anything, this episode illustrates the cycle of violence. Immediately after shooting Nago, he's cursed. And then let's talk about the first samurai he kills. He's still new to his journey, and he doesn't realize how destructive the hatred in his cursed arm has made him. His first arrow rips a man's arm off, and the second arrow decapitates someone. That doesn't normally happen. I hope. What he intended to be a deterrent instead becomes brutal and deadly without him even intending it. I'm not going to justify this one, but I do think this is the moment where Ashitaka learns to avoid violence. The next time he encounters samurai, he draws his sword as a deterrent, but he doesn't use it. He leaps over them. Now, let's briefly jump to the point where Ashitaka threatens Jigo.
Don't force me to kill you.
Pretty intimidating, right? Pretty violent? Except guess what? Ashitaka doesn't have any weapons. It's an empty threat, a bluff, and it's actually pretty smart.
Oh dear, you make it sound so very easy. You really ought to relax!
It's a taunt. It gets Jigo away from the forest spirit's head, and in the following fight, Ashitaka doesn't hurt him. This is actually a great example of being a peace warrior. You know what isn't a great example of being a peace warrior? This. Ashitaka, what the heck, man? I can't justify this, and I'm not going to try. This is a moment of failure for Ashitaka as a peace warrior. He shouldn't have killed those guys. Granted, they did shoot Yakul, the best character in the movie, but that doesn't justify violence. Really, none of the violence that Ashitaka commits in this movie can be justified, even though I seem to have spent the past few minutes apparently doing just that. The point is that Ashitaka isn't perfect. We shouldn't expect that of him. We certainly can't expect it of ourselves. Nobody's perfect. As Ueshiba says, never think of yourself as an all-knowing, perfected master. You must continue to practice with your friends and students and progress together in the art of peace. What makes Ashitaka an ideal role model is not that he's perfect, it's that he keeps trying. After he kills his first samurai, he tries not to kill again, and after he breaks that vow, he renews it and spares Eboshi's life. Having committed violence, he now commits himself further to the way of the peace warrior. He exercises restraint and eschews violence. Number 3, be vulnerable. Remember earlier when I said that assertive love didn't mean giving in to the other? That doesn't mean it doesn't involve risk. Ashitaka continually opens himself up to risk. For instance, after he knocks Eboshi out, he turns to carry San out of Irontown. He turns his back on the crowd, including Kiyo, one of the widows carrying a rifle. Being a peace warrior means being vulnerable. It means putting yourself in situations where you could get hurt, which typically requires you to offer people the benefit of the doubt, by the way. It means being ready to get shot in the back, or in the front for that matter. This isn't just about physical vulnerability, though. It's about emotional vulnerability. And that's risky, which is why Professor Chad Ford calls it dangerous love. Feeling love towards someone we are in conflict with is hard. Putting that love into action is even harder, in part because we have to be the first to turn towards the other person. The first to offer an apology, acknowledgement, respect, or a collaborative solution. Ford's entire book, which I have down here, is about the power of vulnerability to transform a conflict. Turning first and loving your enemy is dangerous, and that's why it requires courage. It requires you to let your guard down and show trust. When an opponent comes forward, Ueshiba tells us, move in and greet him. Ashitaka does this to San. Based on her hatred of humans, she is definitely closed off from him when they first meet. She will show no vulnerability to him, but he's very vulnerable with her. He has a bullet hole in him, and she's holding his sword to his throat.
I should kill you for saving her! That woman is evil, and there's no one who can stop me from killing her.
No. Live.
That's enough! I'm not listening to you anymore!
You're beautiful.
In this moment, he shows her not just physical vulnerability, but emotional vulnerability, and it scares her. But it also changes her view of him. Vulnerability invites further vulnerability. As he lies defenseless in her presence, trusting she won't harm him, Ashitaka plants seeds for a later scene, when he awakes to find San sleeping nearby, lying defenseless in his presence, trusting he won't hurt her. She remains in denial about it for a while, but she's come to see him as a person, just as the way he sees her as a person. And that's the power of being vulnerable. Dangerous love, as Ford says, is the most powerful invitation there is to invite reconciliation with the people we are in conflict with. Being vulnerable invites other people to do the same. It invites others to join you in following the way of the peace warrior. Number 4, remain omnipartial. Let me pose a question to you. Whose side is the Ashitaka on? It's a fair question. Even the movie asks it.
Just whose side is he on, anyway?
After all, he's not really on the wolf's side. He's too defensive of the humans for that. But he's also not really on the human side. He defends Sans and the wolves too much for that. So what's the answer? Well, I think it lies in the exchange that precedes Jigo's question.
So it's don't kill the forest gods, now you want us to kill samurai instead.
No! What I want is for the humans in the forest to live in peace!
And there it is. Ashitaka isn't on the side of humans or the side of nature. Ashitaka is on the side of peace, and that means he can't take a side. He eschews the polarization of the conflict. He refuses to see it as a simple binary. In the words of John Green, no simple story can ever be true. In the story that there is a right side who deserves victory and a wrong side who deserves annihilation is too simple to ever be true. Right now I'm taking a class where we're learning about conflict mediation, the kind they do in small claims court. I wish I'd counted the number of times the word omnipartial has been used in this class. Omnipartial is different from being impartial, where you don't take a side. Omnipartial means taking all of the sides. It means valuing every person equally. And we've been taught repeatedly in the class that the only true way to fail as a mediator is to stop being omnipartial. If we want to promote and create peace, we need to value everyone who'll be involved in and affected by that peace. We need to feel love not only for our enemies, but for our enemies' enemies. Omnipartiality means recognizing that both sides of conflict are composed of human beings whose value and worth are infinite and whose fundamental needs should be acknowledged and met. It means saying that both sides deserve to live. It means loving both sides. And yet, despite all the times I've said both sides, this isn't both sidesism or false balance. That's a logical fallacy where a rhetor claims that because both sides of a conflict have committed wrongs, they hold equal blame for the conflict, and their arguments or complaints have equal weight. Omnipartiality doesn't ignore accountability. It doesn't equate the parties' wrongdoings or crimes. What it does is equate their rights to live in peace. I know that what I'm asking you to consider is scary. I know that it feels like the only options are to oppose something wholeheartedly or to support it uncritically. But that isn't true. I'm asking you to break that dichotomy and find something deeper, to find criticism in support and love in opposition, to discover the humanity in an enemy and acknowledge the cruelty in an ally. I'm asking you to stop taking one of two sides and instead take the side of peace. It's hard, I know, but all of this is. Vulnerability is hard. Restraint and nonviolence are hard. Offering the enemy the benefit of the doubt is hard. Keeping a heart at peace is hard. Loving your enemy is hard. Seeing with eyes unclouded by hate is hard. The way of a peace warrior is hard. It's a difficult one and a radical one, and it's a discouraging one. And that's why the last component of being a peace warrior is so important. Number 5, maintain hope. I want to take a look at the first conversation between Ashitaka and Eboshi.
What do you plan to do? What exactly are you here for?
To see with eyes unclouded by hate.
Eyes unclouded. That explains it.
Eyes unclouded by hate. It does seem naive. It sounds optimistic, unrealistic maybe. Idealistic for sure. There's a reason Eboshi laughs at it. You probably know people who would laugh at it. Maybe you would laugh at it. In a world where so many people are driven by hatred, it does seem laughable. But it's not. It can't be. You can't accept that it might be. Remember that John Green quote I shared a few minutes ago? Here's the context for it.
Despair is a lie. Hopelessness is a lie. No simple story can ever be true, and there is no simpler story than nothing means anything.
The cynicism of the world, the cynicism that makes Eboshi laugh at Ashitaka, is founded on a story that isn't true. Things do matter, and there is hope. The fact that there are people who want peace, who are willing to do something to achieve peace, is indication that there is hope for peace. And a peace warrior never gives up hope. Emily Dickinson compares hope to a bird, something fragile and delicate. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And then there's this tweet that I saw years ago, which offers a different image. People speak of hope as though it is this delicate, ephemeral thing made of whispers and spiders' webs. It's not. Hope has dirt on her face, blood on her knuckles, the grit of cobblestones in her hair, and just spat out a tooth as she rises for another go. And here's my take. I think hope is fragile and delicate, but I also think it's willing to last forever. What needs to be resilient and tough and dirty are the hopeful, are us. We're the ones that have to have dirt on our face and blood on our knuckles. Hope can't defend itself. We have to defend it. We have to be the guardians of hope. We have to be peace warriors. Ashitaka faces every trial he meets with hope. Only after having his wound healed by the forest spirit, but not his curse, does he give in to despair and weep. But even then, he refuses to stop fighting. Even when he loses hope for himself, he doesn't lose hope for peace or other people. He fights for it still. He stays true to the way of the peace warrior. So, will you? The world is in need of peace. I don't think anyone is willing to argue against that. But not everyone is willing to do something about it. As we've seen, fighting for peace is hard. All of the parts of it are hard. Nobody's perfect as it. Ashitaka isn't. But it's worth it. All life is a manifestation of the spirit, the manifestation of love. And the art of peace is the purest form of that principle. A warrior is charged with bringing a halt to all contention and strife. I started this video out by defining what contention and peace were. Everything since then has been an example of how to halt contention and build peace. And it works. Look one more time at Princess Mononoke. By the end of the movie, Ashitaka has brought peace to the forest and Irontown. Eboshi is prepared to rebuild a better town, presumably one that doesn't need to exploit the forest. Jigo has given up on his scheming. And even though San can't forgive the humans for what they've done, she harbors no intent of sneaking in at night and killing Eboshi anymore. Ashitaka's peaceable influence has changed the people around him for the better. So now it's your turn. Love your enemy dangerously. Fight for peace with the way of the peace warrior. See with eyes unclouded. Live. Until next time. Peace.